Hi, I'm Tony Northrup, and for my book Stunning Digital Photography, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the D5300 camera. It's not a review. I'm going to show you how to actually use it hands-on. I'm going to walk you through what I think are the most important features, and I'm going to tell you how I set mine up. I'm also going to show you all of the different tasks that you'll need to know how to perform if you're going to work through my book Stunning Digital Photography. So if you already know some of the basic stuff, there's a table of contents in the description that will allow you to skip through the video so you don't have to sit through the whole thing. You can jump just to the tasks that you might already know about. For example, if you're already familiar with how to work your camera and lens, you can just jump forward to the recommended setup so you can learn how I like to set up my D5300. First, let's go over the physical controls on the camera, the stuff you need to do before you take your first picture. You'll have to open up the memory card slot here and put in a memory card. Take standard SD cards. These are relatively inexpensive. Now, I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail about picking your first SD card, but my recommendation would just be to get an inexpensive 32 gigabyte card. Another task you'll need to perform before taking your first picture is putting in the battery. The slot is here on the bottom. Just make sure the battery is charged up. Frankly, when I first get my new camera, I always cram the battery in there even though it's half dead, but that should be fine too. But when you get a chance, charge it up. You'll attach and detach the lens by pushing this button here and twisting it to the right. Now, that's opposite of most camera manufacturers, so if you try to twist it after pushing the button and it doesn't come loose, try just turning it the other direction. You don't have to push the button to attach the lens again. Once you have your memory card, battery, and lens attached, you can turn your camera on. The switch is right here next to the shutter button. Just go from off to on, and it should power right up. Now, if you want to take a picture, all you have to do is, usually it's in green mode there. The green auto mode does everything for you automatically. So you can just put it over there, put the camera up to your eye, and it takes a picture for you. It's making a lot of decisions for you automatically. And one of the things we'll do as we walk through this is show you how to take manual control so it's not popping that flash up all the time. Now I'll walk you through some more of the camera's controls. The next most important control to master is the little flippy screen here. Flips out from the side, and then you can view information about your current settings, or you can switch into live view mode. To switch into live view mode, push this lever here next to the mode dial. You'll hear the mirror pop up, and then you can see through the lens here. This is useful if you're holding the camera out in front of you. So if you're shooting like this, or if you're using the tilty display to hold it over your head or down low to the ground, live view mode is useful. However, I recommend using the viewfinder most of the time. When you use the viewfinder, the camera focuses faster. I also find that the viewfinder is more of an immersive experience because it helps to block out the world around you and allow you to really focus on what you're seeing and the composition. Nonetheless, if you're part of the generation that grew up taking pictures with your camera phone, you might be more comfortable with live view mode. Live view mode will allow you to select focusing points anywhere in the frame, and that's really nice, but like I said before, it will focus very slowly and that can be kind of frustrating. So now I'll talk about the lens controls. The D5300 kit comes with one of two different lenses depending on the kit you buy. The lens I have attached currently is the more expensive of the two lenses. It's the 18-140, and you can see it has pretty typical controls. The big dial here is the zoom control. So this zooms in, so it seems like you're closer to your subject, and that zooms all the way back so that you can take in an entire building, for example, or capture the people that are sitting right across from you at the table. So far away subjects, close-up subjects. And in chapter 2 of Stunning Digital Photography, I'll talk more about perspective and field of view and the other aspects that zooming changes in your composition. If you want to take manual control of the focusing, you'll use the smaller dial here. On this particular lens, it's closer to you. You can turn off autofocus if you want to by switching this switch from A to M. That will prevent the camera from trying to focus, but it's not necessary to manual focus. You can always leave your camera here in autofocus and just take over manual focus if for some reason it fails, or if it doesn't focus on what you wanted it to focus on. There's one more switch on this lens, and it's the VR, the vibration reduction. Other camera manufacturers call this different things: vibration control, optical image stabilization, or just image stabilization. It's all the same thing. When you have VR on, it will help cancel out the shakiness of your hands, and we all have hands that are a little bit shaky, and it can lead to blurry pictures if your shutter speed is slow. I'll cover more information about that in chapter 4, but for the time being, just leave VR turned on. You almost never need to turn it off. Now, I'll look at the, I have a D5300 over here that has the other kit lens option. This lens is almost identical, but it has one important trick to it. Before you can take a picture, you have to push this button in and turn it over to the 18 marking there. This extends the lens a little bit so that you can take pictures. Once you get it opened up, this same dial acts as the zoom. I think that's such a cool feature because it reduces the size of the lens when you're carrying it around. I actually love this little lens just for how compact it is. Once you have it extended, you can manually focus by turning the ring here. However, on this lens, if you want to manually focus, you'll have to switch the switch from A to M there. So now that I've switched it, now I can manually focus. As you're trying to autofocus and something fails and you decide you want to manually focus, just remember you have to flip that switch first and then you can grab the focusing ring. Don't turn it too hard when it's in autofocus or you might break something, but it resists enough that unless you're really brute forcing it, it shouldn't be an issue. This lens also has vibration reduction. It's kind of a standard thing among kit lenses. There's one more important physical control that I want to cover, and that's the diopter. The diopter is this little plus and minus thing here on the viewfinder, and if you look through the lens and everything seems blurry, when the camera thinks it's in focus, then your diopter is probably off. Just give that a twist. What the diopter does is it's just like wearing glasses or putting on reading glasses. And in fact, it is for people who wear glasses. If you wear glasses and you want to take your glasses off and look through the viewfinder, focus on something, and then adjust the diopter until it's sharp. If the diopter is off, if it's set to the wrong marker, then as you look through the viewfinder, everything will be blurry when the camera thinks it's in focus, and that can be very, very confusing. So if it seems like your camera isn't focusing, move that diopter until things get sharp. But otherwise, don't mess with it, right? Because sometimes people try to make an adjustment and they screw it up. If you have good vision, or if you're wearing contacts or glasses and you just keep them on when you're taking a picture, just don't mess with the diopter, just leave it there. I only tell you about it because it sometimes gets accidentally turned. If you want to take a video, the first thing you need to do is to turn on live view mode. So I'll flip my screen back around here. I love the articulating screens because you can protect the screen when you're traveling. I don't flip it around when I'm just carrying it. I keep it exposed, but if I'm throwing it in a bag or something, I'll hide the display away. Turn on live view mode by pushing this dial here. And once live view mode is on, then you can push the record button right here next to the shutter button. And now you're making a video. Now you can push the shutter button halfway to focus during the video. It's not gonna look great because it does not a proper camcorder. You won't have that like smooth focusing that you'll get with a proper camcorder. It'll also be slow enough that you're not gonna be tracking sports. You know, you can't expect to capture your kid running from first base to second base if you're zoomed in tight. With this kind of focusing system, you need a more proper video camera for that. But nonetheless, it's a great video camera for things like your kid's school play or even for short professional films. It's a very capable camera. Just be aware that the focusing is a little slow when video is recording. After you take a few pictures, you'll no doubt want to review them. Maybe you're just showing them off. This is pretty easy. Just make sure you can see the display that is flipped around and then hit the play button right here above the directional controls. The videos or pictures you've taken will appear and you can scroll through them either by pushing the directional control here or by moving the main dial here. This just flips through all the pictures that you have. There's a lot more that you can do once you're starting to review pictures. You can push this little magnifying glass button here to zoom in, and this is really useful. You can zoom all the way in and then pan around the picture to make sure that your focus is sharp. I can see here that the camera focused on Justin's camera instead of his eyes. So seeing that, I would know that I should retake the picture because this one turned out a little bit blurry. I often go in and review and zoom into pictures to make sure that they came out sharp so that I can retake them before the moment is completely lost. If you zoom out far enough, by pushing the lower button here with the negative sign in the magnifying glass, you'll see thumbnails. And thumbnails can make it more easy to find the specific picture that you're looking for. Keep pressing it to zoom farther back. If you decide that you want to delete a picture, just hit that delete button. Of course, I wouldn't want to delete Justin's fine picture there, but a little trash can there pops up, and then just hit it twice to delete the picture. So now I'll walk you through the various camera functions that you need to understand to begin to work through the book Stunning Digital Photography. The first, of course, is to set the date and time on your camera. That doesn't seem like a big deal, right? But once you start to organize your pictures, having the date and time set correctly is going to make your life a lot easier. Now, when you first powered on your camera, it probably walked you through this process. But I want to remind you that you should know how to set it in case you ever travel. If you're in a different time zone, I find it really helpful to set the date and time of my destination. You also want to go in there if, for example, you live in America and you have to suffer through daylight savings time. Be sure to log in and update the date and time for daylight savings time. This particular camera has a GPS built into it, and if you use that GPS, I'll show you how to do that later, it can get the time automatically from the GPS satellites. And that's really nice because when you travel a new place, it'll automatically figure out what time zone you're in. Pretty cool, right? Well, now I'll briefly show you how to set the date and time on it. Press the menu button here in the upper left corner, and on the left here, use the directional control to slide left, and then select the little wrench icon. Then go to the right. This selects the main menu over here, and just scroll down until you see time, zone, and date. And then pan right. This is the way you'll select most everything on this camera. You'll just pan over to the right rather than clicking OK. So set the time zone here, and then you can set the date and time here, as well as turning daylight savings time on or off. Great, so now when we take pictures, it will automatically remember the date and time that we took it. Then when you load it into Lightroom or Picasa, you can go back and find out, oh, I remember I took this picture on my daughter's birthday. You can just select her birth date, and there you'll find your pictures really quickly. It really helps a lot. Now we'll talk about how to set the mode dial. In the book, I'll describe the purposes of manual mode, shutter priority, and aperture priority. If you're not sure what you're doing, don't worry about those just yet. Just keep your camera in that green mode. If you get annoyed by the flash popping up, just turn it to that little lightning bolt with the slash through it. That means no flash. But the green thing and the little no flash thing, that's for people who haven't yet gotten into their camera, who aren't trying to control their pictures. That's a great thing if you are still at that stage, if you're learning and you don't want to be bothered with the technical stuff. It's also great when you hand the camera to somebody else to take a picture of you. So when I want somebody to take a picture of me with my camera, I always just move it over to the green or the no flash thing. But most of the rest of the time, we're going to be in either shutter priority mode, aperture priority mode, or manual mode. So the S mode here allows you to control the shutter. By selecting shutter priority mode, you can control the shutter speed using the main dial here. So I'm hitting the I button here to pop this display up. You can see on the left here, it shows me the current shutter. So because I'm in shutter priority mode, I can move the main dial here and adjust the shutter speed on the left. You can see this is 1/250th of a second, a moderately fast shutter speed, enough to mostly freeze the action of a jogger. If I wanted it to go faster, I would scroll this farther to the right, maybe go up to 1/1000th of a second. That would be enough to mostly freeze the wings of a seagull flying, perhaps. If you wanted to freeze, say, a hummingbird's wings, you might go all the way to 1/4000th of a second. 1/4000th is this camera's maximum shutter speed. Scrolling left here, if you keep going, you can start doing some night photography. So you can see here it's shown as a fraction, 1/3, 1/6. As I go down farther, eventually I'm going to get to a full second. It shows 1 and little quote marks. Those quote marks just mean second. As I keep scrolling left, now I'm at 6 seconds and all the way up to 30 seconds. 30 seconds is this camera's maximum shutter speed, the longest, slowest shutter speed. Now we'll talk about bulb mode in the book. You can't select bulb mode from shutter priority. You have to switch to manual mode. The next mode over is A, that's aperture priority mode, and that gives you direct control over the iris in the lens. That's the opening, and a low f-stop number means a big opening like this, and a high f-stop number like f22 is a little tiny opening that lets through less light. It can be pretty complicated, but I cover it all in detail in chapter 4 of Stunning Digital Photography, so just hold tight. But when you get there, just put your camera into A mode. Then as you're viewing the screen, you can use the main dial here to adjust the aperture. that's shown in the middle, and you can see it graphically represents the size of the lens's iris. So you can see at f3.5, a fairly low f-stop number, it's wide open, and then as I crank down, that gets smaller and smaller. That'll increase my shutter speed or ISO, and it'll give me more depth of field. It just means my whole picture will be in focus if I pick a big number like f22. But again, I'll cover that in detail. One more mode that I want to cover is manual mode. It's the last mode here. Manual mode gives you direct control over both the aperture and the shutter speed, and it will do whatever you tell it to, even if it is the wrong exposure. In aperture priority or shutter priority mode, the camera is doing auto exposure, so it'll decide how it thinks your picture should be exposed. If you want to take full control and not let the camera make any decisions, put it into manual mode. In manual mode, you can move the main dial here to select the shutter speed. If you want to set the aperture, hold down this plus and minus button here, and then move the main dial. So you can see I can pretty quickly change those two settings just by holding or releasing this button here and moving the main dial. Some other cameras will have two separate dials, but it's just fine to hold down that button and move the dial. When you're in manual mode, you can select bulb mode. With bulb mode, the camera will keep the shutter open for as long as you hold that shutter button down. It's useful for night photography if you want to take pictures longer than 30 seconds. Sometimes when I'm out at night, I'll take pictures that are 2 minutes, 5 minutes long. Now, you probably won't stand there with your finger on the shutter button for 5 minutes, right? So what I do instead is I'll use a remote shutter trigger and just lock it open. Well, I'll cover that in chapter 10 of Stunning Digital Photography, but in the meantime, if you want to select bulb mode, just scroll past 30 seconds in manual mode and one more click over and it becomes bulb mode. And that tells it again, keep that shutter open as long as you have the button pushed down. When you're in shutter priority mode or aperture priority mode, the camera will try to auto expose your picture. It'll determine how bright or dark it will be. If you're out in the sun, it's gonna say, hey, it's really bright out here, I can use a really fast shutter speed. Or if you're inside at night or it's really dim, it's gonna know it has to use a long shutter speed and a big wide open aperture. That's what auto exposure is. But sometimes it'll make the wrong decision. Maybe you're taking a picture of your friend outside and their face will end up really dark. Well, if you take a picture, take a look at it on the preview. And if it ends up too dark, you can use exposure compensation to fix it. To adjust the exposure compensation, set your camera to either P mode here, S mode, or A mode. It'll work in the automatic modes too. Hold down this button and then move the main dial. You can see as I'm moving it, this graph here is changing. That graph is showing the current exposure compensation. This bottom right corner here of the quick menu is also showing the exposure compensation. So right now, it's at +1 stop. And if I keep scrolling over, it'll be at +2 stops. After you set exposure compensation to make the picture brighter or darker, you should always remember to set it back to 0. That way, the next picture you take won't be too bright or too dark. This happens to me all the time. I set exposure compensation and then forget it. I kind of wish it would revert automatically, but it doesn't. You have to remember to set it back to 0 when you're done. For more information about exposure compensation, just check out chapter 4. I'll explain it in detail. Whereas exposure compensation controls the shutter speed and aperture to get your pictures properly exposed, you can use flash exposure compensation to control the output of the flash. On this particular camera, you can either use the onboard flash or you can attach an external flash here. I really hate the onboard flash. It makes people look all washed out and it's terrible. So do yourself a favor, go and check out my photography buying guide to help you pick a flash, or just go grab an inexpensive Yongnuo YN568EX flash. It's less than a couple of $100 and it'll make your flash pictures so much better. Anyway, whether you use an external flash or this onboard flash, you can control the output of it so you're not blinding everybody and making them look all washed out, and it's pretty easy to do. To turn on the onboard flash, you'll push that button. But once you have it turned on, you'll have to hold 2 buttons down to adjust the output. You'll hold this button down, and then you'll hold this exposure compensation button down. So now I've got both those held down. And now I can adjust the flash exposure compensation. You can see it there in near the lower right corner. And you can see I can turn it up 1 stop, or more likely I'm going to turn it down. I like to use the flash exposure compensation at like -1.3 or -1.7. That decreases the output of the flash, and I find generally makes the pictures look a little bit better. So you could even just leave it turned down a little bit, but you might remember, in case your flash pictures end up being too dark, that you need to go back and turn that back on. Now, if you're having a hard time remembering all the button combinations, I know holding 2 buttons down at a time, that's not gonna be intuitive when you're trying to take a picture at your kid's birthday party, right? You're gonna be trying to remember which buttons to push. Anytime you forget something, this camera is really intuitive. What you can do is just bring that screen up and then push the I button. Then you can scroll through all the settings here. So I was just adjusting flash exposure compensation. It's right there. Now I can click OK and then just dial it up or down myself. So I don't have to remember where all the buttons are. This is the exposure compensation dial here. Look, it's even got help, shows you what it's gonna do. I find this really helpful, especially for beginning photographers. Don't worry so much about the individual shortcuts. As you get better and you understand how your camera works, you're gonna find those immensely useful. I love having extra buttons on the camera. They let you get it done really quick. They let you respond to changing conditions and take candid pictures without any hesitation. But as you're learning, just go ahead and push that I button and scroll through the different options to find the one that you need. Now let's talk about changing your ISO. ISO is the next most important setting after shutter speed and aperture, and it controls the sensitivity of your camera sensor. If you use a high ISO like ISO 3200, your shutter will be really quick, even if you're indoors. That means you can freeze motion in low light. Your pictures will also end up a little bit noisier. If you use a low ISO like ISO 100, you'll get really clean pictures, but they might require full sunlight. Your camera can set ISO automatically, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. But if you want to set it manually, well, of course, you can use that little quick menu. It's right down here, all the way to the right at the top level. Click it, and then just select the ISO that you want. Gives you little examples of the type of environment you might use the different ISOs in. If you want to quickly change ISO, and that's something I do all the time when I'm taking pictures, by default, you can hold down this FN button here. So hold that down, and then hit the main dial on the back here, and you can see it's showing me the adjusted ISO. We'll take a quick break here and say that if you like this video, click like down below and also click subscribe. And if you haven't yet, do check out my book, Stunning Digital Photography. Now let's go on and talk about continuous shutter and single shutter, different shutter modes. The D5300 has a button for this, and it's really well hidden. You could just completely miss it and never know it was there. It's underneath the lens here. But if you push that, I'll hold that down, and over here, on the main screen here, it'll give you the option to choose different shutter modes. When you set it single mode, you can just take a picture. One picture. Hold the shutter down as long as you want. It just takes one picture. If you want to take more than one picture, switch over to continuous mode. Continuous L there is for the lower rate continuous. So I'll select that and then hold the shutter button down. So there you get a couple of frames a second, and that's good for portraits. I like to take multiple pictures when I'm taking portraits because sometimes people blink. And if you take 2-3 shots continuously like that, it'll work really well. You wouldn't want to use that for faster action though. For faster action, you'll select high speed continuous. 5 frames a second. You can take a lot of pictures that way, and it's a great way to capture sports or anything that's moving really quickly. And in fact, it's not a bad way to do portraits too. So once again, pushing that button on the front. The next option over here is quiet shutter release, and this is terribly useful if, for example, you're a wedding photographer, or maybe you're a photojournalist at a funeral and you want it to be a little quieter. So I'll take a quiet picture. The way quiet mode works is it takes a picture when you push the shutter, but if you hold the shutter down, it will keep the mirror flipped up and not put it down until you release the shutter button. So basically it splits the picture taking process into 2 steps. And this allows you to kind of spread the noise out a little bit. It's still not terribly quiet, but it is quieter than the normal mode. When you push the shutter mode button, you'll see 3 other modes. The 10-second button here is for delayed photos, either for a self-portrait, or if you want to be sure not to shake the camera as you push the shutter button. That's really useful for night and macro photography covered in chapters 10 and 12. So I'll select that 10-second timer here, and when I push the shutter, it's beeping just to communicate to me that it's waiting to take a picture. You can see this light also is blinking. It assumes you're running around. Okay, after all that fanfare, then it takes a picture in 10 seconds. You can change the number of seconds that it waits. I'll show you how to do that in a moment. The other two modes allow you to trigger the camera from the remote. This provides a 2-second delay after you trigger the remote, and this triggers the camera instantly. Now I'll show you how to change focus modes, and we'll do this from the quick menu. So I'll push the I button to allow me to change the modes here. And then the second one from the left here is the focusing mode. You can see I currently have it in AFC, which is continuous autofocus. You can also select AFS, which I refer to as single autofocus in the book, or AFA, which you should basically never use. If you want to switch to manual focus, I suggest moving the dial on the lens here rather than doing it through the menu because it's just easier. You can also control the focus points on the camera. By default, it'll try to use all of its 39 focus points and it'll grab onto whatever it sees first, but that might not be what you want to focus on. What I usually recommend is selecting a single autofocus point and putting it exactly where you want to focus. So the way you'll do this is by pulling up your quick menu and scrolling over to the bottom row, the second from the left, and selecting the focusing modes here. You can see I currently have it set to single point AF. That will allow you to focus on a specific subject. You can also select from dynamic area AF, where it'll track a subject using multiple different focus points. 21 focus points, all 39 focus points. 3D tracking, which on this camera is good for tracking a subject that's moving towards you or away from you, or just auto area AF, which I don't recommend using that at all. Most of the time, we're going to use single point AF because we're being deliberate about where we're focusing. You should also know how to record raw images. Raw images record more detail and provide better quality pictures, but they might take a little more work. Now, I'll cover it in detail in chapter 4, but until then, I would like you to record raw images just so that you have that later when you get a little better at the post-processing. So we'll hit the I button up here, and the first option here is the image quality. And you can see it's by default set to norm. I would certainly at least set fine JPEG. But what I would prefer people do is either select raw here if you already know how to process raw images, or if you prefer just working with JPEG files, which are the file format of almost every picture, then I would suggest selecting raw plus fine, this upper left option here. This is going to take a little more space on your memory card, and if you're trying to shoot continuously, you should definitely revert back to the JPEG setting. But for most uses, for travel photography, pictures of your kids, I think you're going to be much happier if you record raw files. Even if you never use them, you have them. It's basically your digital negative. It's something that you won't ever change and will always be preserved. In other words, you won't ever screw it up like you might when you're editing a JPEG file. It'll be safe and secure for you and capture all the detail. Now let's turn on bracketing, which is terribly useful for night photography and high dynamic range, which I cover in chapters 10 and 11. You can also turn on bracketing from the I menu here, from the quick menu, and it's the third one in. So right now it's off, and the only option I'll ever use is basically AE 2.0. That'll take one picture at the normal exposure, one picture that's really bright, and then one picture that's really dim. We'll cover why you'd want to do that later. One of the most important concepts for you to understand is the histogram, and I'll cover it in detail in chapter 4, but you do need to know how to turn it on in this camera, and it's hidden away in kind of a weird place. I'll push the menu button up here. Now I'll scroll to the left and go up to the playback menu, which is the first one here. Now I'll scroll to the right and I'll scroll all the way down to playback display options, the third option here, and then go right to select it. And now what I'm going to select is overview. This isn't selected by default. So scroll down to the bottom and then push right to select that. Make sure that checkbox is selected. Now, when you're looking at your pictures, you can push up to view the histogram. You might have to push up multiple times. And this is your histogram. It also shows you the shooting data there, your aperture and your shutter speed. So that's really important to understand as you're learning the process of photography. Whether you take a great picture or a terrible picture, you can go back and see what went right or wrong. Checking the histogram is the best way to know if your picture is properly exposed too. But again, more detail in chapter 4. Another important technique to understand, especially for landscape and macro photography, is what I call precise focusing. So to do precise focusing, what you'll do is you'll turn on live view mode by pushing this trigger there. And now you'll zoom in by pushing the magnifying button here. And go ahead and keep zooming in. And I'll go ahead and focus right on this strap. Now that I'm zoomed in, I'll put the lens into manual mode so it doesn't try to autofocus on me. And then I can just adjust it really precisely till it gets to be nice and sharp. And as I get about right, I can continue to zoom in and make sure that the picture is perfectly sharp. And then once it's zoomed in, I won't touch the shutter button again. And then once I have it sharp, I won't adjust the focus anymore. I can zoom back out and take the picture. I call it precise focusing because that's a far more precise way of focusing than using the autofocus system. It's not going to work well with moving subjects like people, but if you're doing landscapes, still life, close-up macro photography, it's immensely useful. In Chapter 10 of Stunning Digital Photography, I'll show you how to create star trail photos. And this camera doesn't need an external trigger to be able to do this because it has an interval trigger built into it, what they call an intervalometer. So I'll hit the menu button to open up the menus, scroll left, and then we'll go down to the second icon here, the camera, and then scroll down this menu. It's the next to last option. I'll scroll right to select the interval timer shooting. I'm going to go ahead and start it now, so I'll select now. And now I'm going to select the interval at which it will take pictures. If you're doing star trails, you can just set this to 1 second. So I'll set that to 1 second, scroll right, and then the number of pictures. What I'll usually do is I'll just set it to a really high number because when you're taking star trails pictures, you don't know really when you're going to leave. Usually you'll run it for an hour or so. So I'll just set it to a really high number, and then when I'm ready to leave, I'll just interrupt it. So you can see I have it set to 100 pictures here. And then as I scroll right, I'll select on to start there. And then instead of going right again, I'll click OK. And you can see it says timer active, and it will begin to take pictures. Now I'll go ahead and turn it off to stop it when I'm ready. But when you're going to be taking star trails pictures, you'll set the shutter speed to 30 seconds, so it won't be happening quite as quickly. I'll also show you how to lock up the mirror in case you want to clean your sensor. That's something I describe in Chapter 5. Sometimes you will get dust on the sensor. So I'll hit the menu here, and then with the wrench icon activated here, I'll scroll down to lock mirror up for cleaning, and then go right, and then I can click start. Now you can take your lens off. See the guts inside the camera. When I hit the shutter button, the mirror flips up and that exposes the sensor underneath. So what I can do is follow the instructions in Chapter 5 to clean the sensor. Then when I'm done, just turn the camera off. That mirror pops down and protects your sensor again. Now I'll show you how I recommend setting up the D5300, both for working through the book and just my own personal preferences. Of course, do whatever you want. This is how I like to have it set up. The first thing I do is turn off that terrible beeping. Oh, I hate cameras that beep all the time. So I'll turn the camera on, and this is one of the custom settings. So it's underneath the pencil icon there. I don't know why it's a pencil. Scroll down to D, shooting display, and then that first option, D1 there, the beeping, off. Whew. No more beeping. Another option I prefer is RAW, which I showed you how to do earlier in the video. You can do it from the image quality on the quick menu. Next, I'll show you how to turn on auto ISO. ISO controls the sensor sensitivity, and especially when you're learning, it's nice to have it do it automatically. It lets you use manual mode without worrying so much about exposure, but even when I'm shooting professionally, I tend to use auto ISO. To turn on auto ISO, select the camera option up here, and then go to the right, and about in the middle, you'll see ISO sensitivity settings. So scroll right to select that, and under auto ISO sensitivity control, turn that on. I also like to set the maximum sensitivity to the highest possible value, which is H1. That just means that your camera will make very noisy pictures if it needs to get the proper exposure. If you don't turn that on, then it will underexpose your picture, and I always just prefer to have it turned on. I'd rather have a noisy picture than an underexposed picture. Another option I like is to have the self-timer take multiple shots. So again, under the menu here, in the custom setting menu with the pencil, we're going to go down to C3, the self-timer. Now this allows you to set the self-timer delay. And if I'm doing night or macro photography where I don't want to shake the camera, then I like this set to 2 seconds rather than 10 seconds. 10 or 20 seconds is good for self-portraits. 2 seconds is good for night and macro photography. So I'll select 2 seconds. And if I am doing a self-portrait, you can set the number of shots to something higher. You can go all the way to 9 pictures. And for a self-portrait, that's terribly useful because you don't have to keep running back to the camera to push the shutter button again to take multiple pictures. And you know, if you have 5 people in your self-portrait, somebody's going to be blinking at every shot. But if you take 9 pictures, hopefully there's one picture where everybody's smiling and there's no like rabbit ears and no blinky faces or derpy faces or anything like that. So take lots of pictures. In chapter 2, composition, you'll learn about the rule of thirds. And the viewfinder has a great display that helps you comply with the rule of thirds. Not really a rule, it's more of a suggestion. But that is hidden under the custom setting menu. In the D menu, here we'll see D2, the viewfinder grid display. I'll just turn that on, and then we'll show you a little grid as you're looking at the viewfinder. It also helps you align the horizons so you get those straight horizons. So important if you're working at the beach or around tall buildings. While we're in that D menu, I like to turn on the ISO display, D3. So I'll select that and turn it on. That allows you to see the current ISO while you're looking through the viewfinder. It shows up where you would normally see how many pictures you have left, but if you have a big memory card, it's probably not a problem, and I'd rather see the ISO. One more custom setting I'll show you if you're interested in back button focus, which I cover in detail in chapter 4. It's a little advanced. I wouldn't try it right away, but consider it when you get there. It is under the custom setting menu under F. So I'll scroll down to the Assign AEL AFL button, and I'll select that last option, which is AF on. And once I select this, back button focusing is enabled. That means that when the lens is in autofocus, it will focus when I push this button, but it won't focus when I push the shutter button. That'll make more sense when you get to chapter 4. You'll be able to understand why you might want to do that more. So that's all of my recommended settings. Now I'll show you a couple of cool features that are pretty unique to the D5300. I'll start with GPS data. I love the GPS data option. As I'm traveling around, it will record where I am, my latitude and longitude. And then when I load it into Lightroom, I can go and look at a map and find my pictures. So for example, if I remember that I took some cool pictures of my kid at the playground, I can just find the playground on the map and there will all the pictures be. It's just a cool way to find your pictures. If you're a landscape photographer and you take a great picture of a mountain, but you want to go back when the weather is better, you can look it up on a map and find your way back there. I'll show you how to turn it on real quick. Open up the menu and then go down to the wrench here. And as we scroll down a little bit, there's an option for location data, and it says record location data, and we'll just turn that on. That's off by default because it uses a bunch of batteries. And so beware, when you turn it on, it will be going through a bunch of batteries. If you're just at your house, you might not want to bother to have it on, or you might want to just pack an extra battery so that you don't have to worry about it turning off. You probably don't need to create a log. The log will actually record your location wherever you happen to be, even if you're not taking pictures, and that can be kind of cool if you want to track your journey, but if not, then it's going to be wasting batteries. Now I'll show you how to use the Wi-Fi feature. One of the coolest, not necessarily the most useful, but one of the coolest features that this camera has. Once again, under the wrench menu, I'll go to the last page of it and select Wi-Fi here. And then under network connection, I'll just turn it on, set it to enable. Now the Wi-Fi is on, and I just need to, see it says waiting for connection, pull my phone out. Now under my camera settings, I'm using an iPhone, but the Android phone will work similarly. I'll pick Wi-Fi and select the camera's Wi-Fi network. You can see here it has a network called Nikon. The first time you set it up, there'll be a little setup to do, but it's not too bad. Just follow the prompts that appear. After my camera gets connected, I can open up the Nikon app. The Nikon app, thankfully it's free. Just get it from your phone's store. It's called the Wireless Mobility Utility. Great name, right? Okay, so there are a couple of things we can do. We can click View Photos here to view the pictures on the camera. All right, you can see I don't have a lot of beautiful pictures today because I've been taking sample pictures, but all right, there's my man Justin. I'll select this, and then if I want to send it to my phone, I'll click the checkbox there. Now it's stored on my phone, and I can just go in and open up my photos. And there he is. So because it's on my phone, I can now easily post it to Facebook. How cool is that? I'll jump back to the camera app. And if you go to take photos, basically it turns on live view mode in the camera, except you can see everything from remote. Look, we can look around the studio. Monitor over there. And if I want to take a picture, I'll just click the button here. And when you take a picture with the remote, it will automatically download it to your camera. So that's what I think are the most important things to know about the D5300. I would suggest watching the video again, and using your hands this time. As I'm talking about something, go ahead and push the buttons and twist the dials and do everything I tell you how to do, because photography is kind of like riding a bike. I can't tell you how to do it. There's some muscle memory involved. You have to teach your hands. And the more you do it with your fingers, the more easily you'll remember, the better your chances are of getting the picture when the moment comes. If you like this video and you don't yet have my book, Stunning Digital Photography, do check it out. If you have a new camera and you want to figure out what lenses and flashes and tripods to buy, check out my photography buying guide. If you think books are lame, don't worry. I have a DVD and Blu-ray series. You can pick either one. They're available at Amazon or at our own store at sdpcommunity.com. If you have any questions, just write a comment down below and I'll probably get back to you. Thanks so much.